My grandmother used to tell me stories to scare me into behaving. Content warning, child abuse. So, my grandmother used to tell me stories that were supposed to scare me into behaving. She threatened that if I didn't behave, my father would remarry someone wicked, and I'd be at the mercy of a stepmother who'd make my life hell. It felt like nonsense at the time, a bedtime story to keep me from acting out. She told me one particular story often, especially after my mother died when I was 8. The idea of my father remarrying was terrifying enough without her adding a wicked stepmother into the mix. But after she passed away last month, I found her stories coming back to me in the worst way. The story went something like this. There were once 2 children, a boy and a girl, whose mother died when they were young. Their father, a businessman, traveled frequently, and when he remarried a woman he met one day on his trip, the children hoped for love and care. But the new wife was cruel. She accused them of mischief, locked them in their rooms, and denied them food as punishment. One day, when their father was away, the stepmother went too far. She left the children outside, forbidding them to come inside for water or shade. The boy collapsed first, his sister trying to drag him back toward the house. By the time the stepmother returned, both were dead. Panicked, she buried the bodies in the garden, under the onion patch. When the father came home, she cried and claimed the children had run away. Distraught, he believed her, held a memorial, and invited the extended family over for dinner. He asked the stepmother to prepare a feast to honor the children. She went to the garden to pick vegetables, but as she pulled at the onions, she heard a voice whisper, my mother, don't pull on my hair. You've killed me, and now buried me here." Terrified, she ran inside, claiming nothing was wrong. The father, confused, went to the garden himself. When he picked the onions, they looked like human heads, pale and weeping. Still, the stepmother cooked the meal, her tears mixing with the onions as she chopped them. But as the family gathered to eat, a song echoed through the house. Our mother, don't feed us to him. Our father will miss us. Your future is grim." The guests restrained the wicked stepmother and tore apart the house, searching for the children who had been singing. Eventually, they found their way to the garden and noticed the freshly turned dirt. They dug down and found the children's bodies headless and rotting beneath the onions. The stepmother confessed everything. She was hanged that same week. My grandmother would end the story with a warning. That's why you must behave. Otherwise, your father might find someone like her. Needless to say, I wasn't too close to her and felt only a little sad when she passed. My father never remarried, and I was his only child, so we inherited their house when she passed a few years after my grandfather. While cleaning the attic, I found my grandfather's journals while sorting through her belongings. I wasn't expecting anything unusual. Most of it was routine. Entries about work, the good weather, or my grandmother. But one entry near the end caught my attention. It was an entry from early in their marriage, and it read, I dreamt of the children again. They sang the same song, crying for justice. My hands feel so heavy when I work in the garden. What did you do, Eleanor? What have you hidden from me? The words didn't make sense. Who were the children? My father was an only child, as far as I knew. Why did he mention digging in the garden? I never saw anything strange in the garden or at their house, until now. The sole inheritors of their will, my father and I moved into their house, a beautiful Victorian with a sprawling yard and nearby streams. The first night I heard it, I thought it was a prank. A faint melody drifted through the house, barely loud enough to hear. It sounded like children singing, but the words were indistinct, mixed with the babbling brooks nearby. By the second night, I was sure it was coming from the garden. I stood at the back door, straining to listen, and heard it clearly this time. Our brother, our sister, you live in our home. I froze. It was the same song from the story. By the fourth night, the voices followed me inside. They sang as I tried to sleep, whispering in the walls and under the floorboards. I swore I could hear dirt shifting beneath the house. I had trouble sleeping, and when I asked my father about it, he would shut my questions down and tell me to ignore it all. Then things escalated. One night, as we were having dinner, we both froze. The singing was clear this time, the words unmistakable. Our brother, you sit in our place. Your daughter won't miss you or remember your face. The blood drained from my father's face. I could tell he recognized the words, even if he wouldn't admit it. It's just the pipes, he muttered, shoving his chair back and retreating to his bedroom. But I knew better. The nights grew worse. The voices followed us into the house, whispering accusations. They would call us out in unison, chillingly playful. You took our place. We want it back. I started seeing them. Two pale, translucent figures standing in the garden at night, their hollow eyes fixed on the house. My father saw them too, though he tried to deny it. His health began to deteriorate. He barely slept, jumping at every creak of the floorboards or gust of wind rattling the windows. One morning, I found him in the kitchen, staring out at the garden with dark circles under his eyes. I don't know what they want from me, he whispered. I didn't do anything. I decided to dig in the garden. The soil felt damp and heavy as if it hadn't been touched in years, but the deeper I went, the more I found. First, small bones, too small to be anything but a child. Then, there was a clump of hair, brittle and matted with dirt. The spirits became more aggressive, targeting my father specifically. His bedroom door would slam shut in the middle of the night. He'd wake up screaming, clutching his chest, claiming he felt small hands pulling at his hair. One night, I woke to the sound of breaking glass. I ran to his room and found him collapsed on the floor, clutching the broken shards of a picture frame. They won't stop, he gasped. They want me dead. I tried to reassure him, but the look in his eyes told me he'd already given up. The next morning, he was gone. His body was stiff, his eyes wide with terror, as though he'd seen something no living person should ever witness. I thought the torment would end with him, and that the ghosts would finally rest. But I was wrong. The night after his funeral, the singing returned. It was louder this time, and the words had changed. Your father is gone, so we wait for you. Your place is here. You'll never break through. I've tried leaving the house. I always find myself back at the front door, no matter how far I drive or how fast I run. The garden is thriving again. The onions, thick and vibrant, though I haven't touched the soil. The singing never stops. I don't know how long I've been here. Days, weeks. Time seems different now. The voices call to me constantly, lulling me into a strange, dreamlike haze. Sometimes, I see my father standing in the garden, just beyond the onions, watching me with those empty eyes. If you ever inherit an old house with a perfect garden, burn it down. Burn it to the ground and never look back. Because once you're here, there is no escape. And if you ever hear singing in your garden, ignore it. And for God's sake, don't dig. Whistling at 1:30 a.m. So, I got home from my boyfriend's house around 1:30 a.m. on Friday. I parked my car down the road from my house since we don't have space. As I get to my walkway to the front door of my house, I hear a short 1-2 whistle. Not like wolf whistling, but a very quick one, like when you're trying to get someone's attention. I stop and look around, and I can't see anyone or hear anyone moving. I'm pretty familiar with my neighbors. We're in a small dead-end street, and in the 10 years we've lived here, they've never done this sort of thing, so I think I can rule them out. Anyway, as I go up to the top step of the landing, I hear the whistle again. I stop, look around, and again, I see and hear nothing. I felt my heart start to race, and I turned my back to put my key in the door. As I'm putting my key in the lock, I hear the fucking whistle again, but it sounded closer, or like it came from a slightly different direction. Still from behind me, but closer to where I was. I have never opened my doors so fucking fast. I peeked through the windows to the side, and still couldn't see who it could have been. The next day, I tell my family and boyfriend over dinner about the whistling. And they all said, "Oh, it's just a bird. That noisy bird." And yeah, there is a noisy bird in our area that makes noise at day and night. However, it's not a whistle. As such, it does more of a high-pitched tune that goes on for like 2 or 3 seconds. It's a distinct noise, and it sounds nothing like a normal whistle. And of course, I can distinguish the two because I've heard this bird all day, every day for a few months now. Fast forward to this morning, my mum messages me and says my sister heard whistling last night. Before she could send her next message, I said, "If you're going to say it's a bird, it's not." She said my sister told her it definitely came from a person and it was like a song. But not that bird we were talking about, it was a person. My sister said she heard it at 4 a.m. and thought someone was in the house. It was that clear, and she wanted to scream but she was too scared. I don't know, maybe it's the new bird that's flown into our neighborhood. But in the years we've been here, no one in the family has mentioned any creepy things, like whistling in the night. And for it to happen a couple times within the space of 1 week? I don't know, man. It's weird. If anyone has heard of similar stuff happening in the middle of the night like this, please let me know. Update. I heard the whistling last night, but not the initial whistle from a week ago. I heard the sing-song whistle that my sister heard. It was loud and clear enough to wake me from my sleep around 3:30 a.m. I sat up and stopped to listen, and it was a tune. I tried to hear if it was a song, and then maybe I could recognize it. It was not anything I recognized. It was so creepy hearing it so clearly. I can't believe I woke up from it. It didn't sound like it was coming from inside, but very close to my house, outside on my side of the house. I told my mom, and now she's all freaked out because two of us have heard it. What if someone is lurking around the house and all that? My dad, being big, strong, macho man, nothing scares me, is telling us it's the neighbors or birds and to relax. How can I be scared now? My horrifying experience at Lake Tahoe. So, in the summer of 2021, I'm a male, 15 at the time. My family and I decided to finally take a vacation. We didn't travel much, so the idea of going somewhere nearby yet otherworldly was thrilling. Our destination? Lake Tahoe. The trip began like any other. We drove from Western California to the northern shores of the lake. Everything was perfect. Almost. The whole family was there, except my father, who would join us later because of work. The next morning, we went to the lake for some swimming. The Nevada side of the North Shore was stunning. Afterward, we returned to our cozy little Airbnb cabin. The following day, we revisited the same beach. This time, my uncle introduced us to some rocks he discovered for cliff jumping. He and his wife paddled us to the area using their boards. The rocks were nestled in a secluded cove, only accessible by water. It was exhilarating, climbing and leaping into the deep, cold lake. One rock stood out, a giant, far into the lake. Too distant and daunting for us to attempt. Still, we made a mental note of it before paddling back to the shore. Later that afternoon, my father finally arrived. We excitedly recounted our rock jumping adventure, and he seemed especially eager to try it. Everyone else was too tired, so it was just me and him. Without a paddleboard, we would have to swim from rock to rock. At first, it was simple: swim, climb, jump, and repeat. Then my father, ever the daredevil, pushed me to tackle the massive rock far out in the lake. I hesitated, but I didn't want to show any fear, so I agreed. The swim to the big rock felt endless. I was usually a strong swimmer, but something about that stretch was unnerving, like the lake was pulling me down. When we finally reached it, the jagged surface was too hard to climb. My dad hoisted me up, and together we stood on top. The rock was even larger up close, towering above the water. He volunteered to jump first. Watching him leap felt surreal. He fell for what seemed like ages before hitting the water with a resounding slap. Then, nothing. Seconds stretched painfully. He didn't surface. My chest tightened, panic creeping in. Suddenly, he emerged, gasping, his face a ghostly shade of pale. Are you okay?" I called out, my voice cracking. He looked up, his expression strained, almost hollow, before forcing a weak smile. "Yeah," he laughed nervously. "Big jump, huh?" His laugh didn't reach his eyes. Still, he insisted that I jump too. Reluctantly, I did. The drop wasn't as terrifying as I had expected, but something about the water felt wrong. Cold, heavy, almost alive. When I resurfaced, my dad was frantically urging me to hurry back. His desperation was contagious. We swam back in silence. His pace was feverish. When we returned to the beach, my dad pulled my mother and grandparents aside. Their hushed conversation grew tense, and their faces darkening. I sat alone, confused, until sirens wailed in the distance. Minutes later, an ambulance and police cars arrived at the beach parking lot. The trip continued uneventfully after that, or so I thought. It wasn't until 2 years later that I learned the truth. What my father had seen beneath the surface of that massive rock. A body, bloated, lifeless, drifting in the shadows below. To this day, he refuses to talk about it. We haven't been back to Tahoe, and we never will. I was witness to my whole family being murdered, and there was nothing I could do about it. Whenever I heard that familiar sound of the door opening, I would get excited. Molly had taken her two young sons to soccer practice, while I sat and waited patiently for them to get back. I was trying to keep myself entertained when the sound of broken glass caught my attention. Then the sound of footsteps creeping around the house. A sense of fear washed over me as the door slowly opened and a masked figure crept into the house while whistling a creepy tune. There was nothing familiar about him, which only heightened my sense of fear. The man in the mask walked slowly around the room, whistling in sheer delight, as if the excitement of his intended goal made him giddy. "Perfect," I heard him say as he began to conceal himself behind the curtain. I couldn't see him, but I could hear him breathing deeply. It wasn't long before I heard the sound of the front door opening. The sound of the masked intruder's breath intensified as Molly came into the room, unaware that someone was lurking in the shadows. She came over to greet me, as she always did. I tried my best to warn her, but it was too late. The maniac was already behind her, slipping a steel blade in under her chin and slicing her throat. It didn't take long for Ben, the older of Molly's two kids, to walk in and find his mother holding her throat and gasping for breath. She tried to warn him of the danger that was still in the room, and all I could do was sit and watch. He never saw it coming. The killer plunged the knife into his spine and then finished him off with a slice to the throat. Alex had gone to his room and had no idea the man who had just murdered his brother and mother was now making his way upstairs to finish what he started. Alex sat in his gaming chair, headphones blaring as the killer crept up behind. I couldn't see what happened, but the sounds that echoed through the house were much to go by. I was glad I didn't. After the killer was done, he came back to the room. The killer was careful to remove any evidence he left behind. He was very meticulous and knew exactly what he was doing. Before he left, he walked over to me and leaned down to me, lifting his mask and revealing his seemingly normal appearance. "It's funny, you're the only witness, and you can't speak," he laughed as he turned and walked away. The heartbroken father eventually came home and discovered his whole world had been torn apart. He was inconsolable, a broken, tormented shell of a man, forever changed by the sight of his slain family. After a little nap, men in white suits came into the house to gather evidence from the bodies that were still laid on the floor. One of the men was whistling a familiar tune as he took pictures of the bodies. He took the camera away from his face to reveal, to my horror, the same man who had committed this horrible act. He turned to me and smiled. "Hey, little hamster, remember me? Do you want to hear something funny? I'm gonna make it look like Dad did it." I didn't realize my girlfriend was telling me the truth when she told me her secret. I had been dating Mary for about 2 months when she told me about the marble. We had already exchanged the L word, at least she had. She said she loved me, that she wanted to be with me forever, that she wanted nothing more than to spend every night of her life with me, in my arms. I couldn't say it back to her, because obviously, how could I? She had never actually spent a whole night with me. How could I say I love you to a woman who desperately rushed out of the door after a few hours with me? Oh, we slept together. There was no problem in that department. The most amazing sex of our lives. We murmured to each other, our limbs and hair intertwined. Then, as we would get drowsy and heavy, she'd jerk up, frantic, her jade green eyes wide open in terror, start pulling on her clothes. "Mary, come back," I'd beg. "Sweetheart, where are you going? Stay with me." She'd kiss me. "No, I can't. I have to go home. I can't sleep over. I told you so." "But why? You said you don't have kids or a husband." I couldn't help the note of suspicion in my voice. "I swear I don't." She would kiss me deeply. "I just can't sleep over. It's nothing bad, I swear. I have to go." And then she'd leave. I believed her, and eventually, after she told me she loved me, she swore me to secrecy and told me the real reason why she wouldn't stay. Sitting close to me, snuggling up, she said, "Fareed, please believe me. I turn into marble when I fall asleep." I smiled kindly. "Okay, Mary, whatever." "No, I'm serious. I turn to actual stone when I sleep. It started happening after an old boyfriend of mine." She paused for a moment and swallowed hard. "Tried to assault me while I was asleep." I fought down the shocking rage which flamed inside of me. I drew her closer to me, kissed her, and asked, "What do you mean, my love?" Tears spilled out of her eyes. "I don't know why. I've researched. I've never dared to tell anyone. At first it was cool. Then, that's how I knew. I started dating again, and it happened the first night I slept over with my new boyfriend, Barry. I was wakened by his screaming. He was screaming, staring at me. I had turned into a marble statue when asleep, and as I wake up, I turn back to normal human flesh." I shook my head. I didn't understand what she was talking about, but I realized it was some sort of trial of our love. I didn't need to understand. I kissed her trembling lips. "Listen, Mary, I don't care about that, okay? You could turn into a frog when you fall asleep, and I would still love you." Her eyes lit up. "Oh, Farid," she sighed. "You've never told me you love me before." I kissed her again. "I haven't? How remiss of me. I'm telling you now. I love you, Mary." She started crying. I thought it was from joy, but thinking back to that night, I realized it was from relief. You don't understand," she sobbed, "how terrified I was of losing you. I love you so much, and the sleeping thing. I've never slept over with a man since Barry. He killed himself. He couldn't handle seeing me turn into marble. It wasn't my fault. He already had issues." I stroked her jet black hair. "Shh. You don't have to talk about it." But she continued sobbing and talking. "No, no, I ruined all my relationships because I couldn't sleep over with anyone. They all said they didn't mind at first, then they grew suspicious like you did, thought that I must be cheating on someone, and then I heard you sounding the same. I couldn't bear it, so I'm telling you, it's just because I turn into marble when I fall asleep. I film myself. It starts from my legs, and then the marble comes all the way up. And then when I wake up, it's reversed, from the top of my head going down. I turn back into human. I wanted her to stop talking about the marble and Barry and the other men she'd slept with before me. I held her closely, kissed her face, which was wet with tears. Please, Mary, please. It's okay. I believe you. I didn't mean to sound suspicious. I'm sorry. Stay over with me tonight, please. I don't care about the marble. Her sobs gradually faded, and she clung to me. Soon enough, our embrace changed from solace and comfort to passion. Our time together was the most joyful we had ever had. The burden of confession off Mary's shoulders, she abandoned herself to pleasure like I have never seen in a woman, and probably never will again. It was around midnight, I think, that we fell asleep, entangled in each other. I jerked awake only a short while after, conscious of a heavy coldness pressing against my shin. Conscious of a heavy coldness pressing against my skin, my neck. Something stone cold was against me, digging into my flesh. My right arm and leg seemed to be caged in something cold. I reached out with my free arm and switched on the bedside light, confused and groggy. And then, in the harsh electric light, I saw a statue of a woman lying next to me, in white marble veined with jade green and jet black, her stone arms and legs interlaced with mine. I gave a cry of terror, frantically trying to free my captive arm and leg. At the sound, the marble seemed to shiver, and flush of human color starting from the top of her head. I was trying to prise myself free, and just as I succeeded in pulling away and pushing her off, her eyes opened. I pushed her off the bed as I jumped backwards. She fell to the ground, and I heard her cry out and a loud, shattering noise. Then, silence. Mary? I quivered, and slowly I went around to her side. There she was, lying in two marble pieces broken on the ground. Only her head was of human flesh, her black hair spread back, her jade green eyes wide open, staring at me in agony, her lips open in her last cry. The 1957 Eden Hill Community Center charity auction. The Eden Hill Community Center closed every night at 8 o'clock on the dot. Every year, without fail, since the building was officially opened in a grand ceremony some 30 years back. Every night on the dot, except for the evening of July 29th, 1957. No one attending the charity auction for the local country club noticed as time ticked from 8 o'clock to 8:01, to a quarter past, to half past. They hadn't even noticed when the sun that had spilled in through the picture windows faded and slipped below the horizon, leaving only the dim ceiling lights to illuminate the attending crowd. Those who had been there since 5 o'clock Those who had been there since the 5 o'clock starting time sat in rapt attention. There was blood staining their fancy clothes. There was blood drying under their fingernails. The chairs they sat on creaked and rocked on uneven legs. They scuffed the hardwood floor below. The rich folk of the town, who so often had a complaint on their lips, so quick to inform the mayor of an issue he should really look into, had no room in their mind for such trivialities. They did not care for once the community center had seen better days. What was it to them that the chairs were old, or the floor needed replacing, or that old Mrs. Dodson was lying dead in the middle of the conference room? All eyes were on the auctioneer, a small and slim man that paced across an erected stage. He wore plain clothes, and his features were nondescript in the flicker of sodium lights, but for a shimmer of deep blue eyes. He spoke in a voice of rolling thunder, a rumble low and deep that grabbed their souls by the roots. He possessed a languid manner of speaking, melodic, even more a preacher or a teacher than an auctioneer, and yet the crowd hung on his every word, not even daring to cough or shift too much, almost frightened that they may miss anything he said. When he had first arrived, prime and prompt as the town preferred, laughter had spread across the audience. He looked soft for an auctioneer, young and inexperienced, though they could not quite put a finger on why. People turned to their neighbors and did not bother to whisper as they asked, "Who is this boy?" A club member's son or nephew, given the role because no one else had stepped up for it? An answer was not forthcoming. The town was small, the kind of cozy where everyone knew each other and knew each other's business, and amusement turned to curiosity at who the stranger might be. There had been no confusion when no one stepped up to introduce him. No confusion when the event started with no fanfare or announcement. The auctioneer simply took place beside the folding table that carried the wares up for auction. Things that, had the present citizens cared enough to pay attention, did not seem to belong. And he started to speak. The upper echelon of Edenhill wanted what he had to offer. The auctioneer presented them with the next item on the docket, an old pocket watch, its hands frozen in time at noon over a printed map of a landmass that did not exist. Burnished metal still managed to wink at them as he turned it to present the engraving on the back. The brass was inlaid with the image of a giant sea creature that seemed to move, to shift ever so slightly amongst the waves it breached. The creature towered above a three-mast ship, with the moon staring down upon them. It was a sort of design that the God-fearing folk looked down upon, somewhere between the profane and juvenile, while the rest of the watch was worn and broken, having passed through many hands over the years and decades. The engraving looked new. But they knew, on some primal level, they all thought themselves above, that it had always been there. Handcrafted, the auctioneer said in his casual way. He turned the watch over in his hands to give his audience a continuous view of it. Starting bid at $5. Any takers? A flash of movement, the moment he had finished speaking, drew the eye of the crowd. Homemaker Nancy Feldman turned to her neighbor Alan Farmer and raked nails down his cheek before he had a chance to make a bid. Her fingers caught in his mouth, and amidst gnashing teeth, she hooked around the corner of his lip. He howled as she tugged, as the nails of her other hand curled into a fist in the tender flesh of his other cheek, like it was nothing more than paper. Blood scattered across her face, and she grinned. A tongue, much too long, darted out from her pink lips to lap at what landed on her chin. She savored the sweet and tangy taste, licking it from her fingers. The thought crossed her mind that she should find a way to use this in her recipes. Wouldn't that be nice? With a brand new pocket watch on top of that, she was sure her husband, Dennis, would be delighted. She could sense him at that very moment, stirring to motion, a low growl in her ear that sent a thrill up her spine. He launched across her to tackle someone, their bloodied face so ruined that Nancy couldn't even tell who it was. She could even see the roots of their sharpened teeth through their cheek when they bit down on her husband's shoulder. The occupants of Eden Hill Community Center descended into the chaos of wild animals, biting and clawing and tearing at anything they could reach. And all the while, from atop the erected stage, the auctioneer watched.